Welcome to Introduction to Document Similarity. My name's David Kloster, and Tassie Gniady is sitting in the back there, and she and I will be presenting. Why don't we start? I think most everybody's been here yes, everybody here's already been here, so we can speed through some of this then, because either you're already set up to access all the stuff we need to, or it looks like don't have laptops anyway. So, and how are we doing online? Anybody following along online that's going to want to hear in more detail? Oh, okay. Oh, I can see it on there. Okay. Okay. So welcome. We work for Cyberinfrastructure for Digital Humanities, and that is part of Research Technologies, which is part of UITS. And we are located in the Cyberinfrastructure building, which is that big building there on the corner of 10th and the bypass over there. So if you consult with us, we will probably have you meet us there. If you want to follow along, you need to have a Carbonate account. And to access it, to access Research Desktop, you need to have a ThinLink client, which most of you already have or are not following along. And then if you want to follow along on the slides, the link on the bottom will hold the slides for this very presentation. Today, again, Introduction to Document Similarity. Next week, on the 14th, Valentine's Day, we're going to be having our hands-on text extravaganza. So, woo! So this is where you come in with your text issues, your text analysis projects, and things that you need help with, and your dreams, your goals, all of those things, and we will sit down with you and help you, and set up other times to maybe come and help if we need more time. And but anyway, just show up, and I believe Tassie's promised food, treats. So I think she did. Either that or she's gonna tell me I'm having to pay for it because I just put words in her mouth. And then after that, we're going to be switching gears. I believe we're having some guest speakers come in for a few weeks. So Rome Reborn, visiting Rome in 8320. And Tassie knows a bit more. So, okay. But anyway, the rest of that, it's going to be mostly photogrammetry, VR, and that kind of thing. So our outline for today, we're going to pregame. I'll quickly go through that since everybody here already has an account or is not going to be following along on computers. So, and then what is document similarity? What is document similarity good for? And then we're going to compare some documents and have some fun. So, most of or actually all of our notebooks are set up to be used on Research Desktop. So if you're using it on a personal computer of some kind, you'll need to change a few things, mostly just file paths and things like that, and possibly have to download and install some packages and things. But our supercomputers here are pretty cool, and they already have Jupyter Notebooks and RStudio pre-installed on them, so you don't have to mess with trying to figure that out. So the Jupyter Notebooks we use, great thing about them is we can annotate them. And so we can explain exactly what the code is doing below, so that it makes it easier to follow, especially if you're a beginner or even if you're not and this is just a new area. You can figure out what's going on. So they're great for teaching as well. And again, we're going to be using Python again today. And again, most of you have heard this, so I will sneak past this. But Monty Python's cool, so right there. And if you want to access the scripts, here's the link, but I believe everybody already has it, so we'll go past that. And the ThinLink client, everybody knows how to do this. And the box setup. And so this is the folder. This is something you might still need if you are trying to follow along. So it's going to be the intro doc similarity folder is what you're going to drag and drop onto Carbonate. There's a Jupyter Notebook. And now for something completely different.
Sorry, transferring the mic. So, green eggs and ham. I was looking for an example that would be like fun, and I kept finding like machine learning is fun. I was like, I mean, it's cool and stuff, but then I found one that, yeah, I thought maybe spoke to us a little bit more. So the reason I want to talk about this is because we're going to be using some, I want you to understand a little bit behind what's happening here. So when we do documents, actually, did that go? I guess so. I guess I changed the order. Why is it not? There we go. Sorry. So the vector space is defined in terms of the vocabulary used in the text. Each and every word in the vocabulary has its own distinct orthogonal dimension. So literally, we are like using maths, right? Like mapping it into space. For example, if our corpus is the Dr. Seuss story, Green Eggs and Ham, then after making it lowercase, which we've talked about in sort of our other stuff. And does everybody remember like why lowercasing is important? Okay, good, thanks for shaking your head. So because if I'm talking about, if I go to the banks of the lake, right there, it's gonna be lowercase, but now I say Lake Placid, blah, 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 but if I want those two things to collapse when I'm counting frequency, the computer sees capital L lake and lowercase l lake, right, as different words. So like with sentiment analysis, I might say lowercase f flood and capital, all capitals flood, right? Like I do want those to have different intensity. But if I'm counting the number of times somebody uses the word flood on a day like today, right? Like I want those two things to be the same. So we lowercase everything. So similarly, we remove stop words. And the reason is that stop words make up, and I'm gonna lie right here because I kind of feel like I've forgotten. Look it up for me really quickly in the corpus of linguistics. It's a Wikipedia entry. It's like about, just look up stop words, I think. Something like, I wanna say like an amazing number, like 60% of a corpus. Like and, of, the, for, not, and, right? Like so all of those things. So, so we want to get rid of them because generally if I tell you there are 27,543 thes, for most things that doesn't count. It turns out when you do authorship attribution, use of things like stop words is actually really important in determining a fingerprint. But for this kind of stuff, it's not helpful at all. And you'll see later that we even sometimes customize our stop word list. Stemming is when we get rid of, so now we want all the floods to collapse even more, right? So I just said flood and floods, right? Like I want the singular and I want the plural to collapse into each other. It is flooding. I want the, right? I want the gerund to collapse into the flood, right? So it gets rid of all of those kinds of things. And that's important when we do something like this. So once you've done that to Green Eggs and Ham, it reduces to 17 words, which is, I mean, that's actually really lovely, right? And that's why here, it's house, there's no E on the end. Because again, that's the stem version, I think it's mouse, okay? So the space now has 17 dimensions. Really each relating to one of these terms, right? Boat, box, car, dark. So if our documents are sentences from the story, so the way they've chunked it, and chunking is another really important idea, is they've chunked it by sentence. Then it'll be, each of them will be describable by a 17-dimension vector. So we can talk about, I think this last part we can actually leave a little bit. So with our vector space defined, we now need a method by which we can determine the document's position along each of the axes. So recall that each axis represents a specific word in the vocabulary. So we need to give it a score. So let's take, for example, do not like green eggs and ham. After making it lowercase, removing the stop words, stemming, it just becomes green, egg, and ham. The light's still on. Oh. Why is it moving the light? Sorry, Eric. Sorry, Rob. I was so excited about green eggs and ham that the mic fell off. So counting the number of occurrences of each vocabulary word, right, gives us an embedding. So what are all these zeros? Why do I have those? Yeah, absolutely, right? Remember we started with like box and boat and goat, and so literally at this point these are alphabetical. There is no box, there is no boat, there is no goat, and I'm rhyming just like he wants me to. But there is absolutely, right? There's green, an egg, and ham. So similarly, eat them, eat them. Here they are. I still remember being read this as a kid. I don't know what that says, but I remember being read too and not reading it. So just get eat and eat, but that collapses, right, to a 2. Yeah. So all of the other things are 0 because here they are actually, and them, those are all stop words that fall out. We usually get rid of to be words. And like I said, there's a lot of ways to think about stop wording, and there are different stop word lists out there. And that's its own kind of lecture if you want to go down that rabbit hole with me sometime. Yeah. Oh, because eat happened twice. Because I said to you, I didn't just say eat them, I said eat them, eat them. Yeah. Oh, okay, I do not like, so again, I think what you've remembered really well is from sentiment analysis, the question is, why are not and like taken out? And because they're considered stop words, there are some versions of this algorithm, and I'll have to look more into ours, or we'll talk about some decomposition that look at n-grams, right? So again, that might say, oh, I do want to keep that not, because if I say I do not hate you, green eggs and ham, right? That not hating might be really important. So yeah, that's like I said, and this is where I feel like sometimes computer scientists or people who are data scientists don't always look under the hood. So that's a really great question. So just this morning, David made for me, very early this morning, a really awesome matrix of Shakespeare. And initially, it was all alphabetical. And I had a problem with that because in general, we want there to be some ordering as we compare things. So this green line down the middle is because Two Gentlemen of Verona is 100% like Two Gentlemen of Verona. Okay, good. At least my algorithm is working on that level. So I would expect that to be bright green. But it was really hard to read when it was alphabetized because Shakespeare wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna write all is well that ends well, and then I'm gonna write something that begins with a B, and then, right? So now, this is slightly different. What's more important to us and more a way that people think about Shakespeare is the order in which he wrote them. And you have to, there is some contestation on some of the dates here. There are actually multiple witnesses of Othello that give it some different timelines, but that's okay. So, and I had forgotten about King Henry VIII. I don't, like nobody ever does it, that might be why. So you can see, actually up in here, we did have a cluster initially of the Henrys and how they compared to each other. Although you can see they're really different than Two Gentlemen of Verona. So that's what that red is indicating. But what I was really surprised by was one, that Julius Caesar is like such an outlier. It's like, it's about kingship and killing and succession and betrayal. Like, you know, I'd have to go back and look. And there are other things that take place in like ancient Greece, like, you know, like ancient Rome. Like I didn't feel like the setting, because Antony and Cleopatra, obviously like same time, you know. Let's see, actually, let's look. Julius Caesar, where's Antony and Cleopatra? Okay, good. Phew. Phew. Okay, so yes, it should be the most similar. That's giving me faith. So what I was most surprised by was this clustering that happened that was the Winter's Tale, Cymbeline, and the Tempest. And I was like, and I will confess, I took my qualification, my calls a really long time ago. So yeah, I've read all of Shakespeare, but Cymbeline is not really a famous play. For good reason, it's a hot mess. It's sort of all over the place. You can sort of think of it as like a lesser Othello. Winter's Tale is really lovely, but the same kind of thing, like she turns to stone. And so there are these issues of jealousy going on. But then I was like, but the Tempest, they're stranded on an island. It's supposed to be his most like, it's like his least derivative in the sense that it's the only play he didn't plagiarize from somewhere else. Right? Like we know that Romeo and Juliet was written, right? There's an Italian version, right? We know that all his history plays, he's taking from chronicles. So everything else has an original source. And then you get to the Tempest, and they think maybe it's loosely based on like a shipwreck in the Caribbean. But that doesn't account for like a magical fairy named Ariel or Caliban or like any of those things that happen on the island. And so for it to be in that grouping was actually really curious for me. So, and it's about two brothers. Like I said, it's just a really, I feel like it's a different story. And like I said, I just started thinking about this today, but I think there's a lot of food for thought here. And I've seen people do topic modeling, all kinds of things on Shakespeare. I don't know that I've seen LSA really done on the corpus. So I've used a lot of big words. So LSA is a theory or a method used to extract the contextual usage and meaning of words. So one of the examples that you see online a lot is if I'm talking about gasoline and cars and a whole bunch of things in one text, and the next time I'm talking about petrol and cars and the price of it, those two things will collapse to the same space often. They'll be seen as similar. So that's really useful. You also, it's interesting to see what words associate with other words, especially as people who are interested in words. So we can do it not just on a corpus level, but on a word level, which we'll get to later. Single value decomposition is actually, you know, you just see all the, remember all those zeros from the green eggs and ham example? Well, computers actually don't really like sparsity, and sometimes sparsity is not really indicative of much, and so it gets rid of often the lower values of that matrix so that it's not dealing with an n by n dimension, which would take like forever and ever to run even on super fast computers. Cosine similarity is literally, I've now calculated, remember I was talking about orthogonal space, making you go back to like math class, sorry. So I have here and here, I've got two vectors. I can calculate the cosine, right, of the angle between them. And that's what we start getting cosine values. And so what we're looking at when we look at this is actually a range of values that fluctuate between -1 and 1. So, because that's what cosine goes between, right? If you remember your sine waves and cosine waves. So literally our range now is still -1 and 1, but that's why. And some people have talked about negative values and what they mean, and that it's often really interesting to see something that approaches like -1. And then finally, word vectors, which we'll do at the very end today. So it does the opposite of other topic models in that you get to start with a word you're interested in. So remember how I was like totally obsessed like in my earlier talks when I was talking about Shakespeare and I was like, this is my man topic model. It's been hard to sort of repeat that with multiple algorithms, but now what I can do is I can put man into the word vector algorithm and see what the top associated words are. I don't have to hunt through these topics and hope that it comes up. So this is a little bit more about how it's measured, which I think I did say some of this. It does have trouble with polysemy. Polysemy? Is there somebody? Polysemy. There we go. I believe it. I robbed the bank. The bank of the river is muddy. Because it literally is the same word, and now it's like, do I collapse these or not, or whatever, you know, that is one of its limitations. Okay, so what is it good for? I'm gonna hand it back over to David.
Okay, so document similarity is especially useful to get an overview of a corpus that is new to you. Part of this is because it can kind of read through it a lot faster and give you some sense of what you actually have in the corpus. Can be used in one way it does is it weeds out certain documents or highlights others. So we've had ones where we've run them and you get this really stark red line, kind of like with Julius Caesar. And it's really red when we look at it, and there's some negative values in there. And what that tells us a lot of times when you get a negative value is that either you're dealing with two different languages, so you're comparing, you know, most of the corpus might be in English, and you have one document that's mostly in French. Those are going to be negative because it's not going to have a lot of words similar.
Samuel Pepys, in his diary, every time he had sexual relations outside of his marriage, heard about it in the French. Yeah, so that's
or sometimes we get things where, you know, it's, if you're looking at, again, somebody's diary, and then all of a sudden in the diary, maybe they have their accounting for their business and it's just numbers and figures, you're also going to get that stark red line. So it highlights that and tells you, okay, I might not actually want to consider this as part of the corpus because this isn't what I'm interested in right now. It can also show you ones that are really similar. So you have some documents that just no matter what seem to be really green all the way across. Well, why? Why is this one, even to maybe another one that's got a red line, more similar to that than others? And so instead of you having to go through and read 1,000 documents, articles, or whatever, this can give you a snapshot of what you have. It can be used to show similarity in word usage across the corpus, ergo comparing what we talked about, kind of the word vectors man to woman, and see how those actually interrelate, because when Shakespeare, it's going to be different than, say, the other data set we've been using is Star Trek. So you're probably going to see differences between those two data sets, even though it's the same words being compared. And then it can be used to show trends across the corpus. So that's something we're going to show you a little bit later. Basically, are there pockets of similarity? Kind of like what we saw with the last bits of Shakespeare there. The last few seem to really correlate with one another, right? So you're seeing a trend. And if you even looked at it a little closer, your eyes pick up patterns, right? Because that's what our brains are trained to do. We pick up patterns, which is one of the useful things about the heat map. And if you notice, it started to get a little bit greener as Shakespeare's plays went on, as kind of implying maybe he was starting to run out of material or something and was rehashing things.
I was taking that as like he was like coming with like finding his style. I mean, just my man.
So, and you can kind of figure out what caused them. Now you can investigate further and you can focus in on those few documents or a handful of documents that are of interest instead of, again, having to go through and read 1,000 things. And okay, so let's have a little bit of fun here. So this is a heat map. What do you see? You look at it, and I'm sure at first it just looks like a blob of colors, right? So first, the greener the color, the more similar. At least that's how we have it set up. A lot of these heat maps, you can choose your coloring variations, but we figured green, good, green means go, red, bad, red means stop, you know. So the redder it is, the more dissimilar the documents are. So,
And this is the Star Trek Next Generation.
yeah, and this is Star Trek Next Generation, the entire series that we have here. So you notice this corner, if you look, greener, right? And even as you go along here on the top and here, it's greener. And this is just because, I mean, you could technically cut this in half diagonally, because now you're just getting in, these should kind of resemble each other on the other sides of this, which is good. We see that, it's working. But you just notice those patterns, and you kind of wonder why is it greener here than over here, right? And then, what is this? Oh, go back up. This line is really red, more red than the others. Why? So just that initial snapshot already tells us something about our collection, right? So right here, if you notice, is where that change takes place up there. So I've zoomed in, and I notice it's right at season 3, episode 1. Well, why? What does that matter? Well, season 3 of Star Trek saw a new head writer and Gene Roddenberry actually taking a less active role in writing on the show. So now we have a change of writing styles and people who are making up the stories and everything for the show. So that explains why you suddenly have that cutoff right there. And so now we go to our red line, and we're wondering, why is this episode so different from all of the others? Well, in episode 2 of season 5, they encounter an alien race that only speaks in allegory. So it'd be like if you were angry, instead of saying I'm angry, you would say Odin striking, and you talked to express your anger. And so because it's really different than any of the other dialogues. Yeah. Like it actually does fall out the way they said. Yep. So these are just some of the things that the document similarity can really help you with. In our code, one of the things we have it do is it actually spits out a CSV file, and we color it similar to this using Excel, nothing else. This is actually just a spit out in the code itself, and then it saves the CSV. But you notice the scores, so now you can actually see the numbers. You have the perfect ones, where it's comparing itself to itself. And then you have the cosine similarity scores, so you can see that they're all right now, you know, the closer to 1 you get, the more similar it is. And the colors just help your eyes to see those patterns more quickly. 0.5, it really depends on your data set. Because in some data sets, that might be super high. I know we were talking about, an example might be like James Joyce or somebody who has a really eclectic and diverse vocabulary. Yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to find things that are similar, whereas somebody like Ernest Hemingway, who maybe doesn't as much, it's not going to be that shocking that you're going to have really high cosine similarity scores. Yeah. It's actually based on it's more than word frequency. They usually break it down to what they call a term frequency inverse document frequency. And what that actually does is it allows for words that maybe appear a whole lot in one of your documents, but not so much in the rest of the corpus. It gives that a bit more importance, because now it's like, well, why? Why is this word, you know, happening all over the place here, but not anywhere else? So that it recognizes that that is something that's important. So it actually is weighting the words instead of just simply counting them. And it also takes a cover. Yeah. Right. So if I have one episode of play or something that's way longer than your guys, right? That's going to throw things off if you're just doing copy. Yeah. So yeah, because we've had things where we have documents that are, you know, like it's a letter and it's a short one. It's like 2 or 3 sentences, and then you have other letters that are, you know, multiple paragraphs. But it's still by the same author, and you're wanting to compare writing styles. You don't want to throw that out because that's still important. But so it's going to help eliminate that, yeah, that discrepancy. In case you can't tell, Tassie is our Shakespeare.
Oh. Well, I mean, you know, I could subject y'all to Milton, but I feel like he's sadly not as, I mean, if we're going to study dead white men, like he's not as canonical as he used to be. Like he used to be required the same way that Shakespeare was if you were an English major, right? He's not anymore. And I was actually thinking about it really, really early. I think it was the very first time I went to the Digital Humanities Summer Institute. I took a class in which I was thinking about, it was when we were sort of looking at like authorship attribution and writing style. And he was using something called Minitab, which is really, really old, by the way, and some Excel formulary. And I was thinking about, okay, if Milton is supposedly writing, right, like he's talking about how he's taken on the role of being like God's prophet, like to man, then what does it mean? What does the language of his characters mean? Can you see the fallenness in the language of his characters? And so I was comparing them also to how, because of the, the time period that he was in, like how characters spoke in the King James Bible. And what it showed was that Adam and Eve, even pre-fall, are sort of closer to Satan in how they speak than God and the Son. There's just a whole different register there. And I would love to go back and do this now that I have other tools. Just sort of, if I cluster it by speeches, because you do have to pull them out because there's all of that Latin poetry. Like, so Milton writes in iambic pentameter and unrhymed verse, as opposed to Shakespeare, who often does rhyme, although at least he's writing in an iambic pentameter. So here's our Shakespeare. Like I said, I don't expect you to know all of Milton. Feel lucky. So this is where like I said, I hadn't really seen anybody. Lots of people talk about Shakespeare because it's been it's open source, right? Like it's pre-1923. It's way pre-1923. But I hadn't really seen people doing a lot of this. And so I'm even seeing like, so right here. Okay, so that's just because it's flipping around the line, right, David? So these two. Yeah, so that's just all's well that ends well to itself. But then we also see, okay. And so Othello is another really interesting play. It's one of the ones that was subjected to some early machine learning that was meant to categorize the plays as comedies, tragedies, or histories. And it got them all right except for Othello, which it named as a comedy. I know, right? Like, so like Iago, for those of you not in the know, bad dude. Right? He talks about Othello and Desdemona making the beast with two backs, right? Like it's a really famous metaphor for sex. He also has many, many degrading things to say about Othello because he's black. So yeah, not a good guy. And yet, one of my theories is that the register of it is, again, sort of low comedy almost. That if you think about other plays like A Midsummer Night's Dream, where you have the rude mechanicals, literally called the rude mechanicals, and the kind of play that they do, Pyramus and Thisbe at the very end of it, is all about sex jokes. Like there's a crack in the wall, a chink in the wall, and she's like, oh, what do we do through the chink? Like, so I was like, well, maybe it's because Iago spends all of his time speaking like the lower register characters in the comedies. So, but it's interesting here that it does seem to be dissimilar to the early plays, but again, the Henrys kind of throw that off. Like literally, maybe our next step is to throw the Henrys out, because I don't, I feel like they're their own thing. And just sort of look at what else it registers as closely to. Although it does seem to have a fair amount of dissimilarity. And so like I like thinking about Othello. Like it's a good litmus test for what you're doing and why it's happening. So if I want to go deeper though, I've talked about like this whole woman-man thing, right? Like, because occasionally Shakespeare pisses me off as much as I love him with his attitudes. So I look at man in Shakespeare. The number one corollary is woman. And I was like, oh, okay. Do I need to extra tap? Okay. So, and then we've obviously got some names. And then queller, is that literally the verb? Okay. So who is he quelling? But why is he not stunned? I feel like it might be a, will you look up queller Shakespeare for me really quickly? Keep going. Oh, but look, they're also shallow. I think that's also a character name. So I think we might need to look at these. Keep going. And they're wise. Well, duh. And they swear. But then painter? Like, so there's some interesting things here. Why are men seen as painters? Why is that a high corollary? So here's women. We swear too. And we're foolish. Obviously, we have handkerchiefs. And I can think of several, Desdemona and Othello among many. So Iago steals Desdemona's handkerchief and gives it to one of the other characters to prove to Othello that Desdemona is having an affair. So the handkerchief takes on this extra weight. Also subject to folly, but we're wise, we are. And we're wooed, right? Like, because when do we have value in a Shakespeare play? When the men are wooing us. What? Ooh. But really, like, it happened at the end. So now I obviously need to go look at this. Yeah, I'm super fascinated by it. So it is interesting that wise does show up on both of them. And I look at this word made again. It can be used in a negative connotation, but it's usually positive. But again, it's this bound up like being a lady. Do I want to be referred to as a lady? Like, what does that mean if someone insists on calling me that? Like, what kinds of societal expectations are placed upon me if I have to be a lady? Do I have to sit nicely and cross my legs and do my nails and wear makeup and all those kinds of things? It could also be a little time, but so same thing, maid and maiden, right? That there is this set of expectations there. Because strumpet is what you generally see when there's the opposite side of the coin. Okay. And then also I wanted to see what they have a cosine similarity of. And so they have a cosine similarity of 6.65, but I would want to do other comparisons, right? So if we look back up here, that's pretty high. Oh yeah, because it showed up right there. So, but notice, and this is one of the ones too, where man, like the highest corollary may have been woman, but notice how it's lower than even, like it didn't even make the top 10 over here. So again, you just have to think about what those mean. So there's a lot of food for thought, like I said. So you were doing some analysis yesterday for one of our clients on articles about the Spanish-American War, written in Spanish, but published in America?
Some of them were
Yo no sé.
She got them from both. Some places in America, but some she actually had to get from Cuba. Okay, so, and what started to fall out on this, and this is obviously, we're doing this, neither of us are really, we don't really speak Spanish. Like I have the French sometimes, is it started to show this allegiance to America, those articles cluster and are most similar to one another. Stuff that we sent her. She said it was showing a little bit that if you claim to be a friend with the Americanos, then that made you more manly and masculine. So that was a sign of virility. It was a, yeah, it was a sign of like virility, you know, like, yeah, if you were buddy with the Americans, because most of these documents are Cubans, and some there was a Puerto Rican section of the Cuban Revolutionary Party also during this whole thing. So we call it the Spanish-American War, but for them it was actually the Cuban, there was their War of Independence. So, but you know, we like to take things and claim it was us. Yeah, so that actually, I mean, I think that's really interesting. We also have another person who is working on the speeches of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And again, the register is really, really different. If you know anything about sort of American civil rights history, that Martin Luther King, both, you know, by virtue of being a black pastor, right, a Southern Baptist, is going to use sort of the language of God and the language of peace, and the, you know, and he's eloquent. Malcolm X is also eloquent, but in a different way, right? Without, it's not the biblical liturgy. That he's not afraid, I think, to use more striking words. I mean, it's not just, you know, the Black Power movement doesn't just have, you know, the raised hand, the raised fist, right, like as this symbol of power, but that the language changes, especially after the assassination of Martin Luther King, which is when Malcolm X really rises to the fore. And so I haven't seen, no. Malcolm X died before he died in 65. Okay, now I'm really embarrassed. Really? So I was just reading something last night, though, about how the rhetoric
of Malcolm X. So it's really interesting. Okay, so the rhetoric of Malcolm X is more popular after the assassination of Martin Luther King, because I think maybe at that point people were tired. So if they're repeating it, okay, so my bad reading in the middle of the night. And I'm also embarrassed that I didn't know that. You learn something new every day. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out. And if any of their speeches sort of have similarities. I think, and there are times when they spoke together, you know, and there, you know, does their register go to, and I had thought about, and I just couldn't do it, doing a State of the Union comparison for all y'all. But I just, I couldn't. Because I didn't really want to spend that much time thinking about the most recent states of the Union. So that's been another one that a lot of people have done examinations of, because they're usually pretty highly crafted. I mean, it wasn't an accident that Nancy Pelosi was like, you don't have to give this speech, it can be delivered, right? There wasn't a tradition of giving it publicly for a long time. And that it is one of the things that is usually gone through by many, many people. So, and I think it's really interesting that his speechwriters have taken on at this point the tick of the superlative, like the double superlative, because they just know that that's how he talks. So even in a super scripted thing like the State of the Union, it still happened. So, you know, yeah, which again, maybe if you get a script for me, you would still have lots of hand gestures and stuff. I don't know. So do you all have any questions? Do you want to do notebooks? How do you feel on this? On this rainy. Oh yeah, so why don't you get on? Okay.
Okay, well, this time I won't describe as much what I'm actually doing, because you guys have all seen how to get on to Research Desktop now. This will be the 4th time. We will minimize everything. And I can't, is that the right thing? No. Sorry, it's hard to see all the way over on the other side what I'm actually hitting. Okay. A little higher. There we go. Okay. All right, mine's still up from last time. Yay. Yeah, I'm good. I'm just breaking stuff. Sorry, Chris Heller. Okay. So I realized I didn't have my phone, which I need in order to use the Duo. There we go. Yeah. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't. It'd be destroyed by my toddlers in about 3 days. Okay. So while this is loading, here we go. And welcome to Research Desktop. And we are going to open Jupyter Notebook, which if you use this a lot, again, I highly recommend pinning it to the desktop there. Just makes it a lot easier. And let's make this bigger for everybody. I'll start by doing that. And then... Okay. So we're going to go into, again, the intro doc similarity, into the notebooks. And do we want to do the word vectors or the doc similarity first? Okay, we'll do doc similarity then. So again, it's highly annotated. So there's a lot of description, so I won't go into too much of it right now. As usual, we start off with importing our packages and things that we need. Most of, again, is a package called sklearn, which yeah, is going to do most of our TF-IDF right there. Is one of the things it's going to do. And then we have our SVD up here, and then our cosine similarity. So it's going to be doing all of that heavy lifting for us. And we have our stop word list, which right now is set to English, but like I said, I've been using this for Spanish as well. And if you remove the hashtag here and we run this, I got to run the first. Actually, let me run the. So remember, shift return is one way to just run one cell at a time. Or if you want to run all of them, you can just go up to cell and click run all. So you can also do run cells and select below, or you can run all above or all below. So if you're on one and you want to run that one and everything below it, because you've already gotten to that point, you can select run all below. So it gives you some options, but I'm just going to do shift return through since we're going to go through a step at a time here. So if I run this now, it's going to print out on the bottom a list of the available stop word languages that the NLTK package has. So we have Arabic, I'm going to botch that, Azerbaijani, Danish, Dutch, English, Finnish, French, German, Greek. You guys can read it there. So it has a pretty good collection to choose from. So now we're just going to pull in where our data is stored again. And as I've always said, and just reminding again, right here where it says Kloster, that's my username. That's going to be where you want to put yours in. Because if you have a Carbon account, that's what it's going to use for that folder is your IU username. So that should be the only thing if you have dropped our folder in that you'll need to change right now. If you change things around where you're saving this, you'll have to change a few other things from there. But so now we are pulling in our stemmer. So this is going to just chop words, word endings off in the hopes of making things a bit more universal. So again, if you have running and run, the idea is it chops it off so they both become run. And that way, if you're just interested in that idea of moving quickly, it'll keep those. And also there, as you can see, there are also available other languages. So it can stem in, and again, if we remove that hashtag, so that little hashtag there just comments it out, so it skips over it. It doesn't actually do that code. But if I remove it and run this, you can also see now the list of the available stemmer languages. Now the next step is just the functions. So we're creating one that's going to do the stemming, and then that stemming one, if you notice, is actually down here in the one that tokenizes, and tokenizing is just basically splitting it into words. You can also tokenize into just whole sentences, but this one's going to split it and make it into a list of individual words. So now here is where we're going to pull in our data set. You can see it'll take us a minute, but, and again, that little asterisk just means it's thinking, and then when it's done, it pops, it has a number. And just to make sure it's working, we're gonna just, and for this, we've actually saved it in in a dictionary, so it has a key and a value, and the key, you can then tell later in the code, I want the value that comes after this key. So you're kind of creating a way of actually doing a quick lookup of your content. So for our case here, the key is actually the name, because if you see right here, token dict.keys, I'm asking for the first 10 keys. And so you can see the keys are actually the name of our text files. If I were to say, if I were to change that .keys to .values, it would then show us the entire content of that file. So I would get 10 different Shakespeare plays. So to save space, we're doing the keys, but we know it's working at least, so we can move on. So now here we do our term frequency, inverse document frequency. on it, and then we can, and that's going to take it a minute. And then below, we can see some of the output when we run it. And we'll be able to see, again, it takes it a minute. So that asterisk just means it's still thinking. Now it's done. So now we can spit out what we get. And so this is the matrix it's created. And you can see the numbers are, a lot of them are zeros. There we go. If we move it over, so we can see the weighted scores for manhood in some of the plays. So for example, all the Henrys, if you notice, Henry the Sixth Part 2 and Part 3, the term manhood is weighted, whereas it's 0 in others. It's the highest in Part 3 of Henry the Sixth. And then our next highest is Richard III, after the Henrys. So we have that. We can go, and this is just going to show you what actually, so it gives you the whole list, so every word. And it only gives each word once, and then gives you the weighted score for that word as it occurs. So now we go in and we're going to do our singular value decomposition, which is just SVD, and our cosine similarity. To point out, so the number of components, 100, is the threshold. It's just one of those things that is recommended when you do LSA to have that threshold set to 100. And basically what that is doing is it's telling you how many, my mind is blanking. The number components. I don't know why my mind just all of a sudden drew a blank. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Okay. And then iterations is just how many times it's going through your corpus. So it's going to be running the SVD over it multiple times. And then the random state is so that we get the same result. So it makes it reproducible. So if you are presenting this at a conference or something like that, and you want somebody to be able to, be like, hey, here's my code. Here's how I came to this result. That way, if you give them your exact data set and this code, they should be able to reproduce the same results. Because again, because it's using some math in the background, if you don't do that, your results will be a little bit different every time you run it. So the random state you set it to, you can toy with it and get, kind of get certain results. That number is kind of up to you. But the answer to everything in the universe is 42, so we're going to make it 42. And this is going to take a little bit to run. And then we go down here, and all this is doing, this last one is creating that data frame, which kind of looks like a colored Excel file. And so that we can see the colors and get an idea. So you notice here, it's basing it on the overall values in all of the cells for that. So, because you notice like 0.84 is red, like that doesn't seem like that's that different. That's actually pretty similar. But when you have most of them and others that are in the 0.9s and that kind of thing, and 0.8 is about as low as it gets, all of a sudden 0.8 becomes really low. But again, it's dependent on your data set. So there are others, like as you were saying before, where a 0.5 might be super high. So then you're going to have 0.5s that are really green compared to others. So it really just depends. So and now this is just going to output that heat map that we made before for Shakespeare. And this also up here, if you notice, outputted a CSV file. The CSV file will not have these colors. It'll just be white. Like I said, you can go in and add that yourself using Excel tools and that kind of thing. So, and if you're using something else besides Shakespeare, you're going to want to change that name of the file to match your data set. And then the same with down here, we have the name Shakespeare, DocSim, Heatmap. You probably want to change that to something else if you're not doing Shakespeare. So as you can see, this is taking a little bit to to think through it, but it's a, it'll pop it out here in a second. But anyway, so that's our doc similarity matrix notebook. So, and there we go. And the nice thing is it gives you your file names on the side too of this, and then it gives you this nice little legend on the side. And those numbers will change based on your thing. So whatever your lowest number is that's towards the red will be what's at the bottom. So we've had some where we have negative numbers where 0 is actually at the bottom, and you can tell it still goes a little below that. So it's letting you know when that happens that you have some negative numbers in there, which means you have some documents that are really different from everything else. But usually it's going to go all the way up to 1 because we have the ones, the perfect ones going all the way up. So, are there any questions about the notebook, how it works, or about anything else? I know some of you have been here for other workshops. And a little caveat, this is something where in digital humanities, you're usually not going to just use one tool in your research, that usually each tool kind of helps you use the other one. So as we were talking about the project we're helping with the Cuban War for Independence, we also used LDA, we also used LSA, we used the word vector. So we're using multiple tools in order to actually gather and figure out and narrow things down and look at what is going on in a very large corpus that would take us a really long time to have to sit and try to parse through as human beings. So. Which is why we have multiple workshops on these things. Any questions? Any? All right. I will, yeah. Okay. The dictionaries? Yeah. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I know at least the stop word list, especially for NLTK, is very easy to add your own. Yeah, I mean, we've actually have some where, especially with Shakespeare, where we've had to add an early modern stop word because you have thee, thou, you know, those kinds of things that aren't normally in a stop word list. Also, for me, my background is in medieval history, so I had to do a lot of Latin. So I would probably find the Latin stop word list, and I would need to add that. The nice thing about the NLTK stop word list is if you just go into their stop word list folder, because the way they have it is you download their data set, and it's usually just saved somewhere. If you just do search for NLTK data, it'll pop up. And then within that is the stop word list, and it's just files that are labeled English, French, German. So all you have to do is throw yours in, name it that, and then when it says English up there, I would just put in Latin, even though you saw the original list doesn't come with that. Then I can call that, and it will actually use the Latin stop word list that I have made and saved in there. There's also ways where you can, because especially on research desktop specifically, you're not going to have access to that. So there are ways to make your own list and then just append it to your existing list that you've made. So if you have something where, again, like you have a different, different dialects depending on region of Italian, and you want to make a stop word list that, matches those regions depending on which one you're using that you can call in, that's very possible and very doable. The stemmers and lemmatizers, I'm not so sure how, because those are usually really involved, especially a lemmatizer. That's a dictionary that somebody has made and is usually already labeled things as, these are nouns, these are verbs, these are adjectives, these are adverbs in different languages. It then what the infinitive is of a certain word. So, like if you have men, it's going to change them this is a men to man to that nominative singular first person. version of the word. And the same with, again, verbs are going to be the infinitive of that word. So that's generally how a lemmatizer works, whereas a stemmer just cuts off endings in the hope that it'll, again, bring some uniformity that way. So those things are a lot more difficult to then, if they don't have it in that language, to make your own and have it work. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, a lot of these tools, remember, they're not going to be 100% all the time, because it's still dealing with human language. We've talked about this with sentiment analysis as well. Not 100%, because there's times where even humans have trouble deciphering sarcasm. So it's really hard to expect a computer to do it better. Right? So same thing here. It's still going to be, but it definitely, these are very, very useful tools, and especially trying to help you when you have, larger corpus or a new one that you're not quite sure of. Although we always tell you, the other caveat is test these out on something you do know first to make sure it's working. So what? No? Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so like that's example. So we have a joke for a while. We were actually getting I mean, I love squirrels, like who doesn't? But I was like, how many squirrels are there in the corpus?
Yeah.
There were like
3.
One or 3. So
There's 3.
Same problem, right?
Yeah.
Like it shouldn't. Yeah. So the man color is literally yes, because every time it happens, hyphen. Yeah. But sure.
Yeah. So again, not 100%, but there's going to be a lot, but again, this is going to make your work a bit easier and narrow things down for you a bit. So you have fewer places to look and fewer errors to really find. Like, you're not having to do that all yourself now. Any other questions, concerns? Yes. That be added to the script, you mean, to try and figure the difference out? I think so. Again, it's not going to be 100%. I mean, I know that's part of the reason people started doing this, was to help deal with the polysemy and the synonymy and all that, where we have words that are spelled completely different being used in similar context. Again, we also mentioned that is one of its struggles, though. So bank and bank, I'm robbing a bank versus the bank of a river. So the way it's going to actually decipher those is going to be what's used around it. And it's going to determine that, yeah, okay, they're spelled the same. Like, I have the same characters, but they're not always used the same way. So I know that there are machine learning things that help deal with that. But those are a bit more intense and complicated, and you have to train them with usually a lot of other corpuses. So it starts to, again, learn how these are different and and then, train it what to do with that. But that answer your question? Anything else? No? All right. Yeah, thank you for coming. Well, and help with projects too, but mostly donut. No. All right. Thanks, everyone.